Captain Sarah Chen pulled her helmet off and ran her fingers through sweat-dampened hair as she walked across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield. The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly, turning the concrete into a shimmering heat mirage. Behind her, the distinctive silhouette of her A-10 Thunderbolt II sat cooling, its twin engines still ticking as they settled from another close air support mission. The Warthog, as pilots affectionately called the ugly but beloved aircraft, had brought her home safe once again. Sarah patted the aircraft's nose as she passed, a ritual she'd maintained for 3 years of flying. The plane's official designation was 810965, but she'd nicknamed it Guardian Angel after it had saved a Marine patrol from certain death during her first deployment. "Shun. Debrief in 10, called Major Rodriguez from across the flight line." Sarah waved acknowledgement and headed toward the operations building, her flight suit still damp with perspiration. The mission had been routine, providing overwatch for a convoy moving through the Panjshir Valley. No shots fired, no emergencies, just the kind of boring mission that kept ground troops alive and let pilots come home to hot meals and cold drinks. As she walked, Sarah's mind drifted to the letter in her pocket. Her younger brother Marcus had been accepted to the Air Force Academy. At 19, he was full of dreams about becoming a fighter pilot, flying F-16s or F-22s like the heroes in the movies. Sarah smiled, remembering her own dreams at that age. She'd wanted to fly the fast jets too, but life had other plans. The A-10 community was small and tight-knit. Most pilots ended up there because they loved the mission, protecting ground forces, providing close air support, and flying an aircraft that could take incredible punishment and still bring its pilot home. Sarah had fallen in love with the Warthog during flight training, drawn to its brutal honesty and singular purpose. While other aircraft tried to do everything, the A-10 did one thing perfectly: it killed tanks and protected infantry. Inside the operations center, the air conditioning provided blessed relief from the heat. Sarah grabbed a bottle of water and found a seat in the briefing room where Major Rodriguez was setting up the mission replay on the large monitor. 2 other A-10 pilots were already seated, Captain Mike Shooter Williams and First Lieutenant Ashley Rookie Thompson. "Good mission today, people," Rodriguez began, clicking through the mission timeline. "Chen, your positioning during the convoy's passage through Checkpoint 7 was textbook. Williams, I want to talk about your fuel management on the next sortie. Thompson, solid work on the radio calls." Sarah half listened to the debrief, her thoughts still on her brother's letter. Marcus had asked about her experiences, wanted to know what combat flying was really like. How could she explain the weight of responsibility she felt every time she strapped into the cockpit? How could she describe the adrenaline surge when ground forces called for immediate support, knowing that someone's life depended on her accuracy and skill? The briefing wrapped up, and Sarah headed to her quarters in the temporary housing area. The prefabricated buildings weren't much to look at, but they provided shelter and privacy. She sat on her narrow bed and pulled out her laptop to write to Marcus. "Dear little brother," she typed, then paused. Marcus wasn't little anymore. He'd grown 6 inches since she'd last seen him, according to their mother's latest email. "Congratulations on getting into the academy. I'm so proud of you, and I know Mom and Dad are too." Sarah stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. How could she tell him about the real Air Force? About the long hours, the stress, the moments of absolute terror mixed with periods of crushing boredom? About watching friends get shot down or struggle with injuries and trauma? About the politics and bureaucracy that sometimes seemed designed to prevent pilots from doing their jobs? But she also thought about the good parts. The camaraderie that bonded pilots closer than family. The satisfaction of a mission well flown. The knowledge that her skills and dedication made a real difference in the world. The pure joy of flight, even in a machine as ungainly as the Warthog. "The academy will challenge you in ways you can't imagine," she continued typing. "The academics are tough, the military training is tougher, and the whole experience will test everything you think you know about yourself. But if you stick with it, if you really want to serve and fly, it will give you opportunities you never dreamed of." A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Chen? You in there?" It was Thompson's voice. "Come in, rookie." Sarah saved her email draft and closed the laptop. Thompson entered, looking uncertain. Despite her call sign, Ashley Thompson was actually a highly competent pilot who'd earned her wings with distinction. The nickname had stuck from her first day at the squadron when she'd accidentally saluted a senior enlisted maintainer, thinking he was an officer based on his obvious authority and competence. I wanted to thank you for today, Thompson said, sitting in the single chair near Sarah's small desk. The way you positioned during that convoy escort, I learned more watching you work than I did in 6 months of training. Sarah smiled. That's how it works. We all learn from each other. What specifically did you notice? Your altitude management. You stayed high enough to maintain good situational awareness but low enough to identify threats quickly. And the way you communicated with the ground controller, very clear, very calm. When that radio call came in about possible movement in Sector 4, you didn't get excited or rush. You just methodically checked it out. The ground guys depend on us to be their eyes and ears, Sarah explained. Getting excited or rushed leads to mistakes. Mistakes get people killed. Thompson nodded, absorbing the lesson. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you ever regret not flying fighters? I mean, everyone talks about how fighter pilots get all the glory, all the respect. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to get an F-16 slot. Sarah leaned back against her pillow, considering the question. It was one she'd asked herself many times over the years. You know what the difference is between us and fighter pilots? What? When a fighter pilot goes to war, he's thinking about air-to-air combat, about shooting down enemy aircraft, about being an ace. When we go to war, we're thinking about the 19-year-old kid from Iowa who's pinned down by sniper fire and needs us to make the bad guys stop shooting. Thompson smiled. I like that perspective. Don't get me wrong, Sarah continued. Fighter pilots serve an important role. Air superiority is crucial. But what we do, close air support, combat search and rescue escort, convoy protection, that's personal. We know the people we're protecting. Sometimes we talk to them on the radio. Sometimes we see them on the ground, waving at us after we've cleared a threat. After Thompson left, Sarah returned to her letter to Marcus. She wrote about the honor of serving, about the responsibility that came with military aviation, and about the satisfaction of meaningful work. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges, but she emphasized the rewards. Whatever aircraft you end up flying, remember that you're serving something bigger than yourself, she typed. Every mission matters. Every flight is an opportunity to make a difference. She hit send and leaned back, thinking about tomorrow's schedule. 2 more missions over the next 48 hours, then a well-deserved day off. Maybe she'd catch up on reading or finally write that letter to her old flight instructor who'd helped her through a difficult period during training. The next morning came early, as mornings always did in a combat zone. Sarah was up at 0500 for the mission briefing, her third cup of coffee in hand as she studied the intelligence updates. The convoy they'd be escorting today was larger than usual, medical supplies heading to a forward operating base in a contested area. Weather looks good, reported Captain Williams as he reviewed the meteorological data. Clear skies, light winds, visibility unlimited. Intel shows possible Taliban movement in grid squares 4 to 7 and 4 to 8, added the intelligence officer. Nothing confirmed, but ground forces reported small arms fire in that area yesterday. Sarah studied the map, marking potential threat areas and planning her patrol pattern. The route would take the convoy through a valley with high ground on both sides, perfect terrain for an ambush. She'd need to stay alert and maintain good communication with the convoy commander. Chen, you'll be primary escort, Major Rodriguez announced. Williams, your backup. Thompson, you'll maintain high cover and coordinate with any additional assets if we need them. The 3 pilots gathered around the map table for final coordination. Sarah traced the convoy route with her finger, pointing out key terrain features and potential threats. We'll establish contact with the convoy commander here, she said, indicating a checkpoint near the beginning of the route. I'll maintain close escort while Williams provides area reconnaissance about 5 miles ahead. What's our response protocol if we take contact? Williams asked. Standard close air support procedures, Rodriguez replied. Ground commander has authority to clear us hot if they're taking effective fire. Remember, medical supplies are critical. We don't want this convoy delayed or diverted unless absolutely necessary. After the briefing, Sarah walked out to her aircraft for the pre-flight inspection. The ground crew had already completed their preparations, but she always performed her own detailed check. In the A-10, the pilot's life depended on every system functioning correctly. The aircraft's distinctive nose art caught her attention, a fierce-looking angel with spread wings, painted just below the cockpit. One of the crew chiefs had added it during her second deployment, and it had become something of a good luck charm for the squadron. Other pilots had started requesting similar artwork for their aircraft. "She's ready to go," a captain called Staff Sergeant Johnson, the crew chief responsible for her aircraft. "Fuel's topped off, weapons system checks good, and we replaced the navigation radio that was giving you trouble yesterday." "Thanks, Sergeant. Any other maintenance issues I should know about?" "No, ma'am. She's running like a top. Bring her home safe." Sarah climbed up the crew ladder and settled into the cockpit, running through the pre-start checklist with practiced efficiency. The A-10's cockpit was functional rather than elegant, every switch and display positioned for combat effectiveness rather than comfort. She loved the no-nonsense design, everything she needed was within easy reach, and there were no unnecessary complications. The engines spun up with their characteristic whine, and Sarah taxied to the active runway. The control tower cleared her for takeoff, and she pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog accelerated slowly but steadily, its heavy structure requiring a longer takeoff roll than more nimble aircraft. Finally, the main gear lifted off the runway, and she was airborne. Flying always cleared Sarah's mind, helping her focus on the mission ahead. The landscape of Afghanistan spread out below, a mixture of rugged beauty and harsh reality. Snow-capped mountains in the distance contrasted with the brown, dusty terrain where the convoy would travel. She established radio contact with the convoy commander, a Marine captain named Phillips who sounded young but confident. "Angel Flight, this is Convoy 72. We're beginning movement in 5 minutes. Appreciate the escort today. Convoy 72, Angel Flight. We have you in sight and will maintain overhead cover throughout your route. Estimated time to destination is 2 hours 15 minutes based on your speed. Copy, Angel Flight. It's good to have you up there." Sarah smiled, banking her aircraft into a lazy circle above the convoy's starting point. Another routine mission, another chance to bring everyone home safe. In the distance, she could see Williams' aircraft maintaining its patrol pattern, searching for any signs of trouble. The convoy began moving, a line of armored vehicles kicking up dust clouds as they navigated the rough terrain. Sarah watched from above, her eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. The mission was just beginning, but she felt confident and ready. Her aircraft was performing perfectly, the weather was cooperating, and the convoy was making good time. As they entered the valley where intelligence had indicated possible enemy activity, Sarah tightened her patrol pattern and increased her vigilance. This was where things could get dangerous quickly. She checked her weapons systems one more time and settled in for what she hoped would be an uneventful flight. The convoy moved steadily through the valley, maintaining radio silence except for essential communications. Sarah could see the Marines in the vehicles below, their weapons ready but hoping not to use them. Everyone wanted this to be a boring day, boring meant everyone went home healthy. Halfway through the valley, the radio crackled to life. "Angel Flight, Convoy 72. We've got movement on the ridgeline to our north. Possible observation team." Sarah immediately turned her attention to the area in question, scanning with her targeting pod. "Convoy 72, I'm looking. Stand by." Through her sensors, she could see 2 figures on the high ground, partially concealed behind rocks. They appeared to be watching the convoy, but she couldn't determine if they were armed or simply local civilians. The rules of engagement were clear, she needed positive identification of hostile intent before engaging. "Convoy 72, I have 2 personnel on the ridgeline. Cannot confirm hostile intent at this time. Recommend continue mission and maintain alertness." Copy, Angel Flight. Continuing movement. The convoy rolled on, and the figures on the ridgeline disappeared. Sarah made note of their location and continued her patrol, wondering if she'd just witnessed a near miss or simply curious locals watching an unusual sight. The rest of the route passed without incident, and the convoy arrived safely at its destination. Sarah and Williams provided one final security sweep of the area before heading back to base, another successful mission completed. As she approached Bugram for landing, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. The medical supplies had reached their destination, the Marines had traveled safely through dangerous territory, and everyone was going home in one piece. In military aviation, those were the missions that mattered most. 3 weeks after the convoy escort mission, Sarah found herself facing a situation she'd never encountered in her military career. Major Rodriguez had called her into his office with an expression she couldn't read, not angry, not pleased, just carefully neutral. "Sit down, Chen," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk about your next assignment." Sarah settled into the chair, trying to read the Major's mood. In 3 years of flying together, Rodriguez had always been straightforward with his pilots. If something was wrong, he said so. If someone had performed well, he made sure they knew it. This careful neutrality was new. "I've just gotten off a conference call with Wing Headquarters," Rodriguez continued. "They've got a special request that's come down from pretty high up the chain." "How do you feel about a temporary assignment to Nevada?" "Nevada, sir? What kind of assignment?" Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "Red flag. They want an A-10 pilot with combat experience to participate in the exercise as part of a demonstration flight. Specifically, they want you." Red Flag was the Air Force's premier air combat training exercise, held at Nellis Air Force Base outside Las Vegas. It brought together pilots from around the world for realistic combat training in the Nevada desert. Sarah had heard about it since flight school but had never participated. A-10 pilots occasionally took part, but it was usually reserved for the most experienced pilots from each squadron. "Why me, sir? There are plenty of pilots with more experience." "That's what I asked," Rodriguez replied. "Apparently, someone at headquarters has been tracking your performance reports. Your mission success rate, your gunnery scores, your evaluations from ground commanders, everything's been consistently outstanding. They want to showcase what the A-10 community can do, and they think you're the right person to do it." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. Red Flag was a big deal, but it also meant leaving her squadron at a critical time. They were scheduled for several high-priority missions over the next month, and every pilot was needed. "What exactly would I be doing at Red Flag?" "The exercise includes a demonstration flight for visiting officials and media. You'd be part of a mixed formation with F-16s and F-15s, showing how different aircraft work together in a combat scenario. After that, you'd participate in the regular exercise for the remainder of the 2 weeks." Rodriguez paused, studying Sarah's expression. "I'm going to be honest with you, Chun. This is a career opportunity. The people who'll be watching this demonstration include generals, defense contractors, and congressional staffers. Getting selected for something like this can open doors you didn't even know existed. And if I screw it up? You won't. I wouldn't be recommending you if I thought there was any chance of that. But I want you to understand what you're getting into. You'll be flying with some very experienced pilots who may not have much respect for the Warthog or its capabilities. Some of the fighter community still sees the A-10 as outdated." Sarah nodded, understanding the politics involved. The debate over the A-10's future had been ongoing for years. Some people in the Pentagon wanted to retire the aircraft, arguing that modern fighters could perform the close air support mission just as well. A-10 pilots and the ground forces they supported strongly disagreed. "When would I leave?" "Next week. You'd have 5 days to prepare at Nellis before the exercise begins. I've already arranged for Captain Williams to cover your scheduled missions here." Sarah considered the opportunity. Part of her was excited about the chance to prove what the A-10 could do on a larger stage. Another part was nervous about leaving her squadron and flying with pilots who might not appreciate her aircraft's capabilities. "What do you think I should do, sir?" Rodriguez smiled for the first time during the conversation. "I think you should pack your bags and show those fighter pilots what real close air support looks like. Just remember, you're not just representing yourself or even this squadron. You're representing every A-10 pilot in the Air Force." After leaving Rodriguez's office, Sarah walked back to her quarters to process the news. The opportunity was exciting, but it also felt like a lot of pressure. She'd be flying with some of the best pilots in the Air Force, and they'd all be watching to see how the Warthog pilot performed. That evening, she called her parents to share the news. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, was immediately interested in the military implications. "Red Flag's a big deal, sweetheart," he said over the phone. "I worked with some Air Force units that had been through that training. They always spoke highly of it. I'm a little nervous, Dad. Flying with all those fighter pilots. You've been in combat for 3 years. You saved lives and completed dozens of successful missions. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there. Her mother was more focused on the practical aspects. Will you be safe? I know it's training, but military flying is always dangerous. It's very safe, Mom. All the best pilots, perfect weather conditions, and excellent maintenance. If anything, it's safer than what I'm doing here. After the call, Sarah sat down to research Red Flag and the pilots she might be flying with. The exercise had a legendary reputation among military aviators. The scenarios were designed to replicate real combat conditions as closely as possible, and the level of competition was intense. She found information about the demonstration flight she'd be participating in. It was scheduled for the second day of the exercise, with an audience that included senior military leaders, defense industry representatives, and members of Congress. The scenario involved a simulated close air support mission, with ground forces requesting immediate assistance against armored targets. The formation would include 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons, an F-15E Strike Eagle, and her A-10. The F-16s would provide air-to-air coverage, the F-15E would handle deeper targets, and the A-10 would engage targets in close proximity to friendly forces. It was exactly the kind of mission the Warthog had been designed for, but performing it in front of such a high-profile audience added significant pressure. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She reviewed tactics manuals, studied the terrain around Nellis Air Force Base, and practiced formation flying with the other pilots in her squadron. Major Rodriguez arranged for additional simulator time so she could rehearse complex scenarios. Remember, he told her during one of their preparation sessions, the other pilots in this formation are going to be very good. Some of them might have attitudes about the A-10, but don't let that get in your head. Focus on your mission and execute it perfectly. Captain Williams offered his own perspective during a break between flights. The thing about fighter pilots, he said, is that they respect performance above everything else. Fly well, communicate clearly, and execute your mission, and they'll come around. Sarah appreciated the advice, but she also understood that she'd be representing more than just her own skills. The A-10 community had been fighting for respect and survival for years. Every mission was an opportunity to prove the aircraft's continued relevance. The day before her departure, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the wing commander, stopped by the Squadron Operations Center to speak with her. Captain Chen, I wanted to wish you good luck personally, the colonel said. This assignment is important for reasons beyond the exercise itself. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure many people realize what's at stake here. There are people in Washington who want to retire the A-10 fleet. They argue that other aircraft can perform the close air support mission more efficiently. This demonstration is an opportunity to show them why they're wrong. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I'll do my best, ma'am. I know you will. I've reviewed your record, and there's a reason you were selected for this. Your performance in combat has been exemplary, and your evaluations from ground commanders are some of the best I've ever seen. Those ground troops trust you with their lives because you've earned that trust. Colonel Hayes paused, looking out at the flight line where several A-10s sat ready for their next missions. The A-10 isn't the fastest aircraft or the most technologically advanced. But it does one thing better than any other aircraft in the world: it protects ground forces. Don't let anyone tell you that's not important. That evening, Sarah packed her bags and made final preparations for the trip to Nevada. She included her flight logs, her tactical manuals, and a small photo of her squadron that had been taken after a particularly successful mission 6 months earlier. The photo showed 12 pilots standing in front of their aircraft, tired but proud after completing a complex operation that had saved an entire Marine company. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Marcus. Heard about your assignment to Red Flag. That's incredible. Can't wait to hear all about it. She smiled, remembering her own excitement about military aviation when she was his age. Everything had seemed so glamorous and exciting then. The reality was more complex: long hours, intense pressure, and constant responsibility for other people's lives. But there were moments of pure satisfaction that made it all worthwhile. The flight to Nevada the next morning was routine, a commercial airliner that took her from the combat zone to the civilized world in a matter of hours. The transition was always jarring, from a place where every day brought the possibility of combat to a world of shopping malls and traffic jams. Nellis Air Force Base was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Red Flag brought together hundreds of pilots and support personnel from around the world, creating a temporary city of military aviation professionals. The base's flight line was crowded with aircraft from different nations and services, F-16s, F-15s, F/-18s, and various support aircraft. Sarah checked into the visiting officer's quarters and received her schedule for the next few days. Tomorrow would be spent in briefings and initial meetings with the other pilots in her formation. The demonstration flight was scheduled for 3 days later, giving them time to practice and coordinate their efforts. Her first meeting was with Major James Viper Morrison, the F-16 pilot who would be leading the formation. Morrison had a reputation as an exceptional pilot and an even better instructor. He'd flown combat missions in multiple theaters and had been selected for the Air Force's elite weapons school. "Captain Chen," Morrison said, extending his hand. "I've heard good things about your work in Afghanistan. Looking forward to flying with you." Sarah was surprised by the warm reception. She'd expected at least some condescension from the fighter pilot community. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be part of this formation. Call me Viper. We're going to be working closely over the next few days, so let's keep it informal." Morrison gestured to a chair in the briefing room. "I want to talk about the demonstration scenario and how we're going to make this work." The scenario was complex but realistic. Ground forces would be pinned down by enemy armor and requesting immediate close air support. The F-15E would handle targets beyond the forward line of troops, the F-16s would maintain air superiority, and Sarah's A-10 would engage targets in close proximity to friendly forces. "The key to this whole thing," Morrison explained, "is coordination and communication. We'll be performing for an audience that includes people who make decisions about aircraft procurement and military strategy. They need to see how different platforms work together to accomplish the mission." Sarah nodded, appreciating Morrison's professional approach. "What's the timeline from initial contact to engagement?" "Fast. We'll simulate a troops in contact scenario where ground forces need immediate assistance. You'll need to be ready to engage within minutes of receiving the call." They spent the next hour reviewing the tactical scenario, discussing communication procedures, and planning their approach to the target area. Morrison was thorough and professional, treating Sarah as an equal partner in the mission rather than a junior pilot along for the ride. After the briefing, Sarah met the other members of the formation. Captain Lisa Torch Davidson flew the F-15E Strike Eagle and had extensive combat experience in multiple theaters. First Lieutenant Mark Rookie Patterson was the second F-16 pilot, a recent graduate of fighter training but with excellent skills and a sharp tactical mind. "So you're the famous A-10 pilot," Davidson said with a grin. "I've heard some impressive stories about your missions in Afghanistan." "Just doing my job," Sarah replied, but she appreciated the recognition. "Don't be modest," Patterson added. "Major Morrison showed us some of your mission reports. That convoy escort where you identified and neutralized 3 separate ambush sites, that was textbook close air support." Sarah was surprised that her mission reports had been circulated, but she was pleased that her work was being recognized by pilots from other communities. It suggested that the demonstration flight might be more collaborative than competitive. The rest of the day was spent in additional briefings, reviewing safety procedures, and getting familiar with the Nellis Range complex. The training airspace was enormous, with realistic targets and sophisticated electronic warfare systems that could simulate almost any combat scenario. That evening, Sarah called Major Rodriguez to update him on her progress. "How are they treating you?" he asked. "Better than I expected. The formation leader is very professional, and the other pilots seem genuinely interested in learning about A-10 capabilities." "Good. That's what I was hoping for. Remember, this is as much about education as demonstration. A lot of these people have never worked closely with A-10s." Sarah spent the evening reviewing her notes and preparing for the next day's training flights. She felt confident about the scenario and her role in the formation, but she also understood that she'd need to perform flawlessly to represent her aircraft and community effectively. As she settled in for the night, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a young woman dreaming of military flight to a combat veteran preparing to demonstrate her skills on one of the Air Force's biggest stages, it had been an incredible path. Tomorrow would begin the most important flying of her career, and she was ready for the challenge. The morning of the demonstration flight dawned clear and bright over the Nevada desert. Sarah had been awake since 04:30, running through mental rehearsals of the mission while she prepared her gear. The pressure was unlike anything she'd experienced in combat, at least in Afghanistan. The only people watching were the ones whose lives depended on her performance. Today, generals and politicians would be judging not just her skills, but the entire future of the A-10 program. The briefing room was packed with pilots, controllers, safety officers, and observers when Sarah arrived at 0630. Major Morrison stood at the front, reviewing the day's weather and mission parameters on a large display screen. "Gentlemen and lady," he began, nodding toward Sarah, "today we demonstrate how modern air power works when everything goes right. Our scenario is realistic, our execution needs to be flawless." The weather was perfect: clear skies, light winds, unlimited visibility. The range was active and ready, with simulated enemy targets arranged in a complex defensive pattern. Ground controllers would play the role of troops in contact, calling for immediate air support. Sarah reviewed her aircraft's configuration one final time. She'd be carrying a mix of training ammunition and live ordnance for the demonstration. The 30mm cannon would fire training rounds that could still destroy the armored targets on the range, while her missiles would be inert but fully functional for demonstration purposes. "Chen," Morrison called as the briefing concluded, "walk with me to the aircraft." They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The flight line was bustling with activity as ground crews made final preparations. Sarah's A-10 sat among the sleek fighters like a bulldog surrounded by greyhounds, ungainly but purposeful. "I want you to know something," Morrison said as they walked. "I've been flying fighters for 12 years, and I've always thought the A-10 was obsolete. Too slow, too vulnerable, too specialized for modern warfare." Sarah braced herself for criticism, but Morrison continued in a different direction. "Then, I read your mission reports and talked to some ground controllers who've worked with you. I was wrong. What you do, that precision, that ability to operate in close proximity to friendly forces, it's something my F-16 can't replicate." "Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Today isn't just about proving the A-10's capabilities. It's about proving that different aircraft serve different purposes, and we need all of them to accomplish the mission." Sarah felt some of her nervousness ease. Having the formation leader's support made the pressure more manageable. The pre-flight inspection revealed her aircraft in perfect condition. Staff Sergeant Martinez, her crew chief for the exercise, had clearly spent extra time ensuring everything was spotless and functional. "She's ready for anything, Captain," Martinez reported. "Weapons systems check good, avionics are perfect, and the engines are running better than specification." "Thanks, Sergeant. I appreciate the extra attention. This is a big day for all of us A-10 folks," Martinez replied. "Make us proud." Sarah climbed into the cockpit and began her startup procedures. Around her, the other aircraft in the formation were coming to life. Morrison's F-16 was already taxiing, followed by Davidson's F-15E. Patterson would be last, maintaining formation discipline even on the ground. The radio crackled with clearances and coordination calls. "Viper formation, contact ground control frequency 121.9 for taxi clearance. Viper 1, taxi to runway 03 right via taxiway Alpha," came the response from the control tower. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anticipation as her aircraft began moving. This was what she lived for, the moment when training, preparation, and skill came together in actual flight. The fact that hundreds of important people would be watching only added to the significance. The takeoff was smooth and coordinated. Morrison led the formation airborne, with Sarah holding position on his left wing and the other aircraft in trail. As they climbed toward the working altitude, the Nevada desert spread out below them like a brown and tan mosaic. "Range control, Viper formation level at 15,000, ready for scenario initiation," Morrison called as they reached their assigned altitude. "Viper formation, range control. Stand by for troops in contact scenario. Ground forces are taking effective fire from armored vehicles in grid square 4 to 7. Request immediate close air support." The exercise began immediately. Sarah listened as the simulated ground controller painted a picture of units under fire and requesting assistance. The scenario was realistic and urgent. Soldiers were dying while the air support sorted out the tactical situation. "Viper 1 has the target area in sight," Morrison called. "Beginning coordination for close air support." Sarah activated her targeting systems and began searching for the simulated enemy positions. Her aircraft's sensors quickly identified several targets arranged in a defensive pattern among rocky outcroppings and desert terrain. Warthog 1 has multiple armored targets in sight. Ready to engage on your call. The coordination between aircraft was smooth and professional. Davidson's F-15E would handle targets beyond the forward line of friendly troops, while Sarah would engage threats in close proximity to the simulated ground forces. Morrison and Patterson would provide air cover and coordinate the overall attack. Warthog 1, you're cleared hot. Engage targets in grid square 4-7 Alpha. Sarah rolled into her attack run, feeling the familiar surge of focus that came with combat engagement. The A-10 responded perfectly to her inputs, tracking straight and stable toward the target area. Her 30mm cannon was aligned and ready, the targeting system locked onto the first armored vehicle. Warthog 1, in hot on armored target. The cannon fired with its distinctive sound, a deep, rumbling roar that had earned the A-10 the nickname Tank Killer. Training rounds struck the target with devastating accuracy, and the simulated enemy vehicle was officially destroyed. Direct hit, called the ground controller. Outstanding shooting, Warthog 1. We've got more targets bearing 090 from your position. Sarah pulled up from her first attack and immediately began setting up for the next run. This was what the A-10 did better than any other aircraft, multiple attack runs in the same target area, providing sustained fire support for ground forces. The second attack was even more precise than the first. Sarah's training rounds walked across a line of simulated enemy positions, eliminating multiple threats in a single pass. The aircraft's stability and the pilot's experience combined to create devastatingly effective close air support. Phenomenal shooting, the ground controller called. All targets destroyed. Ground forces are mobile and continuing the mission. Morrison's voice came over the radio with clear appreciation. Outstanding work, Warthog 1. That's exactly what ground forces need when they're in trouble. The formation regrouped and prepared for the next phase of the demonstration. This time, the scenario involved a more complex threat environment with both ground targets and simulated enemy aircraft. Sarah would need to coordinate with the fighters while continuing to provide close air support. New scenario, new targets, range control announced. Ground forces are advancing on an enemy stronghold. Multiple armored vehicles and air defense systems in the target area. Simulated enemy fighters are also active. The tactical situation became more complex immediately. Patterson and Morrison engaged the simulated enemy aircraft while Davidson attacked deeper targets. Sarah focused on the air defense systems that posed a threat to all the aircraft in the formation. Warthog 1, ground forces need those SAM sites eliminated before they can advance, the ground controller called. Surface-to-air missile sites were dangerous targets, requiring precision attack to avoid triggering their defensive systems. Sarah approached from an unexpected angle, using terrain masking to avoid detection until the last moment. Her missile attack was perfect. The training weapon struck the simulated SAM site with pinpoint accuracy, eliminating the threat and allowing the ground forces to continue their advance. SAM site destroyed. Ground forces are moving. Outstanding work, all aircraft. The demonstration continued for 40 minutes, with multiple scenarios designed to showcase the capabilities of each aircraft type. Sarah found herself working harder than she had during many combat missions, the pressure of performance adding stress to already challenging flying. But her aircraft was responding perfectly, and her skills were sharp. Each attack run was precise and effective. Each coordination call was clear and professional. She could feel the formation working as a team, each aircraft contributing its unique capabilities to accomplish the mission. Final scenario, range control announced. Troops in contact, immediate assistance required. Multiple targets, time critical. This was the climax of the demonstration, a complex scenario requiring split-second coordination and flawless execution. Ground forces were being overrun and needed immediate air support to survive. Sarah rolled into what would be her most challenging attack run of the day. Multiple targets were scattered across the terrain, some close to friendly forces, others positioned to provide mutual support. She would need to eliminate them quickly and accurately to save the simulated ground troops. The first target fell to her cannon fire. She immediately maneuvered for the second, rolling and turning to line up the shot while avoiding simulated enemy fire. The A-10's maneuverability at low altitude was crucial as she threaded her way through the target area.
target after target fell to her precise shooting.
The ground controller's calls became increasingly excited as the simulated battle turned in favor of the friendly forces.
Direct hits across the board. Enemy forces are retreating. Ground forces are secure.
As Sarah pulled up from her final attack run, she felt a surge of satisfaction unlike anything she'd experienced in combat. Every shot had been perfect. Every maneuver had been flawless. She demonstrated exactly what the A-10 could do when flown by a skilled pilot. Viper formation, range control.
Exercise complete. Outstanding demonstration by all aircraft. RTB when ready.
The return to base was triumphant. Morrison led the formation in a victory roll over the airfield, a traditional salute to a mission well accomplished. Sarah felt pride not just for herself, but for every A-10 pilot who'd ever flown close air support. After landing and shutting down, Sarah was surrounded by ground crew, observers, and fellow pilots. The consensus was unanimous: the demonstration had been flawless, and her performance had been exceptional.
Captain Chen called a voice she didn't recognize.
She turned to see a general approaching, flanked by several aides and civilian officials. General Morrison, Tactical Air Command.
That was some of the finest close air support flying I've ever witnessed. Thank you, sir.
The aircraft performed perfectly, and the formation coordination was outstanding. I've been arguing for years that the A-10 is obsolete, the general continued.
After watching today's demonstration, I'm going to have to reconsider that position.
What you did out there, that precision, that effectiveness, it's something our other aircraft simply cannot replicate. A woman in civilian clothes stepped forward, introducing herself as a congressional staffer who worked on defense appropriations. Captain, I came here expecting to see an outdated aircraft struggling to keep up with modern fighters.
Instead, I saw something irreplaceable.
The way you worked in close proximity to friendly forces, that's a capability we absolutely cannot afford to lose. More officials approached with similar comments.
Defense contractors wanted to discuss upgrades and improvements to the A-10 fleet.
Military leaders talked about expanded roles for close air support aircraft. The political and budgetary support that had been eroding for years was suddenly restored by a single, perfect demonstration.
Major Morrison found Sarah as the crowd began to disperse. I owe you an apology, he said. I've been wrong about the A-10 and what it can do. Today you showed me that air power isn't about speed or technology, it's about the right tool for the right job. Thank you, sir. That means everything coming from you. I'm going to recommend you for an early promotion and a transfer to the weapons school as an instructor. The Air Force needs pilots who can teach others what you demonstrated today. Sarah was stunned. The weapons school was the pinnacle of military aviation, the most elite training program in the Air Force. Being selected as an instructor there would be the highest honor of her career. I don't know what to say, sir. Say yes. The future of close air support depends on pilots like you sharing their knowledge with the next generation. That evening, Sarah called Major Rodriguez to report on the demonstration. How did it go? He asked immediately. Better than I could have imagined. The mission was flawless, and the reception was incredible. I think we changed some minds today about the A-10's future. I'm proud of you, Chen. You represented the entire community perfectly. What's next? Sarah told him about the weapons school recommendation and the praise she'd received from senior leadership. Rodriguez was silent for a moment before responding. That's the opportunity of a lifetime. But it also means leaving the squadron, leaving combat operations. I know. Part of me wants to stay here, keep flying missions, keep protecting ground troops. Listen to me carefully, Rodriguez said. You can protect a lot more ground troops by training other pilots than you can by flying individual missions. If you can teach 50 pilots to fly like you demonstrated today, you've multiplied your impact by 50. Sarah understood the logic, but it was still difficult to imagine leaving the direct mission support that had defined her career. Flying combat missions, protecting ground forces, and working with the tight-knit A-10 community had become her life. But she also understood that today's demonstration had been about more than just flying. It had been about proving the continued relevance of close air support and ensuring that future ground forces would have the protection they needed. The next 2 weeks of Red Flag continued the success of the demonstration flight.
Sarah flew multiple missions with different formations, always performing at the highest level and always representing the A-10 community with distinction. By the end of the exercise, she'd earned respect from pilots throughout the Air Force and established herself as one of the premier close air support pilots of her generation. On her last day at Nellis, Sarah received a package from her brother Marcus. Inside was a newspaper clipping from their hometown paper, with a headline that read "Local Pilot Stars in Air Force Demonstration." The article included quotes from military leaders praising her performance and discussing the importance of the A-10 in modern warfare. "Thought you'd like to see this," Marcus had written. "The whole family is incredibly proud of you. You're exactly the kind of pilot I hope to become someday." Sarah smiled, thinking about her brother's future and the challenges he would face in his own military career. She hoped she could be there to guide him, just as older pilots had guided her through the difficult early years of her career. The flight back to Afghanistan was bittersweet. She was returning to familiar territory and the squadron that had become her family. But she was also carrying the knowledge that her career was about to change dramatically. The weapons school recommendation would likely be approved, opening doors to opportunities she'd never imagined. As the transport aircraft climbed away from Las Vegas, Sarah looked down at Nellis Air Force Base one last time. 2 weeks earlier, she'd arrived as a combat pilot with something to prove. She was leaving as a demonstrated expert whose skills had changed minds at the highest levels of military and political leadership. The future of the A-10 was more secure because of her performance, and the future of close air support was brighter because she'd shown what was possible when training, skill, and dedication came together in perfect flight. 2 years after Red Flag, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chin stood at the podium in the main briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base, looking out at 24 of the most promising close air support pilots in the United States Air Force. The weapons school patch on her flight suit marked her as one of the elite few chosen to train the next generation of combat aviators. "Today we're going to talk about something that most fighter pilots never experience," she began, advancing to the first slide of her presentation. "Flying in support of ground forces who are taking effective enemy fire, where your decisions determine whether American soldiers go home alive or in body bags." The classroom was silent, every pilot focused on her words. These weren't fresh flight school graduates, they were experienced aviators selected for advanced training based on their demonstrated abilities. But most of them had never flown actual close air support missions in combat. "Captain Morrison," Sarah called, addressing one of the students in the front row. "What's the maximum safe distance for 30mm cannon fire from friendly forces?" 100 meters, ma'am," Morrison replied confidently. "Wrong. The answer is, it depends. Terrain, target type, ammunition selection, approach angle, atmospheric conditions, all of these factors affect how close you can safely engage. The textbook answer might keep you out of trouble with safety officers, but it might also get ground troops killed while you refuse to engage a target that you could hit safely." Sarah advanced to the next slide, showing gun camera footage from one of her combat missions. This target was 60 meters from friendly forces. The Marines had been pinned down for 3 hours. Standard procedures said I couldn't engage. But look at the terrain, that ridgeline provides natural protection, and my approach angle gives me a clear shot with minimal risk of fratricide. She played the video, showing her A-10 rolling in for the attack. The 30mm rounds walked precisely across the enemy position, eliminating the threat and allowing the Marines to advance. The footage was steady and professional, but Sarah remembered the adrenaline and pressure of making that split-second decision. "The point isn't to ignore safety procedures," she continued. "The point is to understand them well enough to know when flexibility is required. Ground troops don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions." Major Davidson, one of Sarah's former Red Flag colleagues who now served as an instructor at the weapons school, entered the classroom and caught Sarah's attention. He gestured toward the door, someone wanted to speak with her. "Take 15 minutes to review the case studies in Chapter 12, Sarah told the class. "When we return, I want you to identify 3 factors that influenced each engagement decision." In the hallway, Davidson explained that she had an urgent call from Afghanistan. Sarah's old squadron was dealing with a situation that required her expertise. "Colonel Rodriguez needs to speak with you immediately," Davidson said, handing her a secure phone. "Something about a pilot who's requesting specific guidance on a complex mission." Sarah took the call in a private office, wondering what kind of situation would require consulting an instructor pilot thousands of miles away. "Sarah, thank you for taking the call," Rodriguez's voice came through clearly despite the distance. He'd been promoted and now commanded the entire close air support wing. We've got a pilot here who's facing exactly the kind of scenario you've trained for.
I need your tactical advice. What's the situation, sir?
Captain Williams has a troops in contact call. Marines are pinned down in a valley with wounded who need immediate evacuation. The problem is weather, heavy clouds, limited visibility, and the only safe approach puts the aircraft very close to both friendly and enemy positions.
Sarah immediately understood the complexity.
Low visibility close air support was one of the most dangerous missions an A-10 pilot could fly. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, and the consequences of mistakes were catastrophic.
What's the ground situation? 12 Marines, 3 seriously wounded, surrounded by an estimated 30 enemy fighters.
The wounded need evacuation within the hour or they won't make it.
Standard medevac helicopters can't get in because of the ground fire.
Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the tactical situation. She'd faced similar scenarios during her own combat deployments, and the pressure was enormous. Every second of delay increased the risk to the wounded Marines, but rushing the attack could result in friendly fire casualties.
Can you patch me through to Williams directly? Stand by. A moment later, a younger voice came on the line. Ma'am, this is Captain Williams.
I've read all your case studies, and I've practiced scenarios like this, but I need to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly.
Talk me through what you're seeing, Captain.
Williams described the terrain, the weather conditions, and the positions of both friendly and enemy forces. His tactical assessment was thorough and accurate, but Sarah could hear the stress in his voice. The weight of responsibility for those Marines was enormous.
What's your biggest concern? Sarah asked.
Visibility. I can see the target area, but not clearly enough for precision engagement. If I get closer, I'll be within range of their air defense weapons. If I stay high, I might miss the target and hit our guys.
Sarah had faced the same dilemma during her second deployment.
The solution required combining aggressive flying with absolute precision, exactly the kind of situation the weapons school trained pilots to handle.
Captain, what's the terrain between the enemy position and the Marines?
Rocky outcropping, about 15 feet high, running east-west.
That's your key terrain feature.
Use it to mask your approach and ensure separation between targets and friendlies. Come in from the north, stay below the ridgeline until you're ready to engage, then pop up for a quick attack and immediately return to cover.
Yes, ma'am, I understand the approach. But what if I can't clearly identify the targets in these visibility conditions? Sarah thought about the weapons school students she'd been teaching just minutes earlier. This was exactly the kind of real-world decision that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. Captain, what thermal signature are you seeing from the enemy positions?
Clear heat signatures from multiple personnel and what appears to be crew-served weapons.
And from the Marine positions? Cooler signatures, more dispersed, consistent with troops in defensive positions.
Then, you have positive target identification through thermal imaging. Trust your sensors, trust your training, and execute the mission.
Those Marines are counting on you. Sarah could hear Williams taking a deep breath over the radio. Roger, ma'am. I'm going in. Keep me on the line. I'll monitor and provide guidance as needed. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah listened as Williams executed one of the most challenging close air support missions she'd ever heard. His approach was textbook perfect, using terrain masking and weather conditions to his advantage.
His target identification was thorough and careful.
His weapon employment was precise and effective. Direct hits on enemy positions, came the call from the ground controller.
Effective fire has ceased.
Medevac is inbound.
Sarah felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with a successful mission. But this time, it was different. She'd contributed to saving those Marines not through her own flying, but by passing her knowledge to another pilot. Outstanding work, Captain Williams, she said. That was professional flying under extremely difficult conditions.
Thank you, ma'am. I couldn't have done it without your guidance.
Rodriguez came back on the line as the mission concluded.
Sarah, that pilot just saved 3 Marines' lives using techniques he learned from your training programs. This is exactly why we need you at the weapons school.
After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. For the first time since leaving combat flying, she truly understood the impact of her new role. Every pilot she trained would go on to fly dozens of missions, protecting hundreds of ground troops. The multiplication effect was enormous. She returned to her classroom, where the students were still reviewing case studies. These weren't just academic exercises, they were preparing for the exact situations that Williams had just faced.
Let's talk about low-visibility engagements, Sarah said, advancing to a new slide. Who can tell me the primary challenges of close air support in degraded weather conditions? The discussion that followed was intense and practical.
Sarah shared details from the mission she just monitored, helping the students understand how theoretical knowledge translated to life or death decisions.
The classroom became a bridge between academic training and combat reality.
After class, Major Davidson found Sarah in her office, working on curriculum updates for the next training cycle. "I heard about the mission you talked Williams through," he said.
"Rodriguez called to thank you personally.
It felt good to contribute, even from a distance." Davidson sat down, his expression becoming more serious.
"Sarah, I need to talk to you about something. There's an opportunity coming up that you need to consider." "What kind of opportunity?" "The Pentagon is forming a new close air support development program.
They want someone to lead the effort to improve tactics, training, and aircraft capabilities.
Your name is at the top of their list."
Sarah was intrigued but cautious. Pentagon assignments were career-enhancing, but they also meant leaving operational flying and moving into the world of bureaucracy and politics.
What would be involved?
Working with aircraft manufacturers, developing new training protocols, coordinating with international partners, and briefing senior leadership on close air support requirements. It's a chance to shape the future of the entire mission area. Sarah thought about the path her career had taken since that first deployment to Afghanistan. Each assignment had moved her further from the cockpit but given her more influence over the direction of military aviation.
"I need some time to think about it."
"Of course.
But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often."
That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the potential assignment. Her father, with his Army background, immediately understood the significance. "Pentagon assignments are where real change happens," he said. "You could influence policy that affects every ground soldier and Marine in combat." Her mother was more concerned about the personal implications.
"It sounds like you'd be moving even further away from flying." "That's what I'm struggling with, Mom.
Part of me still wants to be in the cockpit, still wants to be directly involved in missions."
"Sweetheart, you've been directly involved in missions every day since you started teaching at the weapons school.
Every pilot you train goes on to protect ground troops. Your influence is actually greater now than it ever was when you were flying combat missions yourself." Sarah knew her mother was right, but it was still difficult to fully accept. Flying had been her identity for so many years that imagining a career beyond the cockpit felt like losing part of herself.
The next day brought news that helped clarify her thinking.
Captain Williams had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his mission in Afghanistan. The citation specifically mentioned the tactical guidance he'd received from weapons school instructors, acknowledging Sarah's contribution to the successful rescue. Reading the citation, Sarah realized that her impact had evolved rather than diminished. The weapons school allowed her to multiply her effectiveness, training dozens of pilots who would go on to fly thousands of missions. The Pentagon assignment would multiply that effect even further, potentially influencing how the entire military approached close air support. She made her decision and called Major Davidson to accept the Pentagon position. The next phase of her career would take her away from Nellis, away from daily contact with aircraft and pilots, but toward an opportunity to shape the future of military aviation. 6 months later, Colonel Sarah Chen sat in a conference room in the Pentagon, briefing the Secretary of Defense on proposed improvements to close air support capabilities. The audience included generals, admirals, and civilian officials responsible for defense policy and procurement decisions. "The key finding from our analysis," she explained, "is that close air support is fundamentally different from other air missions.
It requires specialized training, specialized aircraft, and specialized tactics.
Attempts to use general-purpose fighters for this role consistently result in reduced effectiveness and increased risk to ground forces." Her presentation included data from recent combat operations, training results from the weapons school, and recommendations for future aircraft development. The briefing was the culmination of months of research and analysis, distilling years of combat experience into actionable policy recommendations.
Colonel Chen, the secretary asked, what's your assessment of current close air support capabilities?
Sir, we have excellent pilots flying excellent aircraft, but we need sustained investment in training and equipment to maintain our edge.
The threat environment is constantly evolving, and our capabilities must evolve with it. Specifically, what investments are most critical? Sarah was ready for this question.
Enhanced training facilities, improved sensors and communication systems, and continued development of aircraft specifically designed for close air support.
Multi-role fighters have their place, but they cannot fully replace specialized CAS platforms.
The briefing continued for an hour, with detailed discussions of budgets, timelines, and strategic priorities. Sarah found herself drawing on every experience from her career, combat missions, training programs, and policy development to make the case for continued investment in close air support. After the meeting, the secretary approached her personally.
Colonel, that was an outstanding presentation.
Your recommendations will carry significant weight in our budget deliberations.
Thank you, sir.
These capabilities are critical to protecting ground forces.
I understand you have a brother in flight training?
Sarah was surprised that he knew this detail.
Yes, sir. He's currently at pilot training in Texas. What aircraft is he hoping to fly? A TENS, sir. He wants to follow in my footsteps.
The secretary smiled.
Based on your briefing today, I'd say he's chosen well.
The A-10 community is in good hands with leaders like you shaping its future. That evening, Sarah called Marcus to share the news about the successful briefing. He was in the final phases of pilot training, and his assignment to a TENS had been confirmed. I can't believe I'm going to be flying the same aircraft you made famous at Red Flag, he said excitedly.
You're going to make your own reputation, Marcus. Just focus on becoming the best pilot you can be. Do you think you'll ever go back to flying? Sarah considered the question.
Part of her missed the cockpit, missed the immediate satisfaction of completing combat missions. But she'd found a different kind of satisfaction in shaping policy and developing future capabilities.
Maybe someday, she replied. But right now, I think I can do more good from where I am. I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've made a real difference.
As Sarah hung up the phone, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a young pilot dreaming of flight to a senior officer shaping the future of military aviation. The path hadn't been what she'd originally envisioned, but it had led to opportunities and impact she'd never imagined. The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities. Sarah's work was helping to ensure that future ground forces would have the best possible air support, and that future pilots would have the training and equipment they needed to protect them. Her tail number might no longer be painted on an A-10 in Afghanistan, but her influence was felt every day in briefing rooms, classrooms, and cockpits around the world. She'd found a way to serve that multiplied her impact while honoring the mission that had first drawn her to military aviation. The story that had begun with a young woman wanting to fly had evolved into something larger, a career dedicated to ensuring that others could fly safely and effectively in service of their country. It wasn't the path she'd originally planned, but it was exactly where she belonged.